Hey everybody, welcome back to Conquest of Ea. First off, I'd like to say that even though I just posted my first couple of videos last night, I really appreciate all the people that have watched some of the videos and subscribed already. You know, it really motivates me to make more content, and as you can see, I'm making a video pretty quickly afterwards. Definitely don't promise this kind of pace in the future, but I just had some spare time tonight, so I thought I would record a quick overview of an in-depth review of like the Mounted Noblelord. He's one of the commanders you get in the two-player starter set on the Hunter Kingdoms side, and we talked about it a little bit in the two-player Hunter Kingdoms review, but this will be a little more of an in-depth review of what kind of upgrades you can give him, what kind of things he can take to make himself a little more defensible, a little more offensive in case he, maybe doesn't get a charge off like you were planning. There's just so many different ways to build all the Hunter Kingdoms characters that it's kind of up to you how you want to tech your characters, but there are definitely some options that are better than others. Some options are just too expensive in my opinion to be good choices, and some are just so cheap that make them a great pick, even though they might not bring a huge benefit. Just that small benefit for 5 or 10 points is absolutely worth it. So let's take a look and see what the Mounted Noblelord can do once you start looking at some of the things like the Masteries and Heirlooms that he can take in the Hunter Kingdoms army list. First, overall, the Mounted Noblelord, if he's your warlord, is giving you that speed of horse, which I talked about in my last video, but it's just so important to emphasize how good this makes all of your household knights in your army. The speed of horse is giving you everything glorious charge, which is going to give them terrifying on the charge, subtracting your enemy's resolve by 1, which is great into anything to push through more damage. Unfortunately, except against Old Dominion, but it's fine, you're getting charged into them anyway. And getting them support 2, so all of the knights that really were just getting the 1 impact hit in the back are now getting extra impact hits, just making those attacks pile on more and more. And since all your knights, including your Mounted Noblelord, have brutal impact 2, charging into things that have higher defense like Dwaycombe and stuff like that, you're already subtracting 2 right off the top of their defense, and then you're subtracting 1 off their resolve as well. So you just see how the speed of horse supremacy ability is just going to allow you to push through so much damage as long as you have at least a couple big units of household knights in your army. Noblelord, just like the Noblelord on foot, can take some weapon arts and just represent, these guys are highly trained ability and they're trained for war. They can take some things that other characters in the army just can't take, as far as these 2 abilities that I've put up here, Arms Master and Powerful Physique. They both do the same thing. One gives Cleave 1 and Powerful Physique at just 5 points, and Arms Master gives you Cleave 2 for 15 points. Now obviously, coming in with the attack, your Mounted Noblelord was impact attack already has the brutal impact, and if you give him the Lorien Lance, which we'll talk about in the next section here, he'll have brutal impact 3. But with his regular attacks coming in right after those impact attacks, he has no cleave at all. He just has some attacks, and if you're fighting something with high defense, they'll most likely save them. So giving him something like Arms Master for Cleave 2 is really awesome. But if you don't want to pay those 15 points, even just Powerful Physique for Cleave 1 can push through a little extra damage. And as you know, we talked about with Speed of Horse, having this guy put in Household Knights, it's all about getting that charge off and doing a maximum amount of damage so they can burst through back into your opponent's back lines, maybe to get some flank or rear charges off. The only mastery that really interested me, and on a foot Noblelord as well, is Disorienting Strikes. And this just comes into play when your opponent wants to duel or you duel with your Mounted Noblelord. It's going to -1 clash against your opponent's character that's dueling your Mounted Noblelord. And maybe -1 clash doesn't seem like a huge deal, but it can really mean the difference between surviving a duel and getting murdered in a duel. And if your character has, Arms Master, Disorienting Strikes, you're hitting way harder than maybe your opponent was expecting, and they aren't hitting you as hard with that -1 clash. So the last thing with the Mounted Noblelord is we're going to go over some of the heirlooms that he can take. So we can only just take one of these. There's no Warhammer Fantasy tooling up somebody with a ton. There is a way if you buy another separate upgrade to give them a second one of these, but then that starts to get pricey. I believe that's 15 points just know that's an option if you did want to tool them up with two of these things. The first one, and the one that I basically put on my Noble Lord, anytime he gets added to my army list, I click this as well. The Lorien Lance gives you brutal impact +1, so you're subtracting 3 off the defense for any impact attacks for your Mounted Noble Lord, and he gets to reroll all of his to hit rolls when he makes impact attacks. For 10 points, that is a huge bargain. This is the one I'm taking basically every time. Now, some other interesting picks for the Heirlooms if you don't take the Lorien Lance. The Armor of Domination is very cool. So any enemy stands in contact with your characters, so not their whole regiment, just the ones that are actually contacting the Mounted Noble Lord stand, lose the Cleave and Smite special rule. They just lose it completely. So any of those high Cleave units that are coming in that are trying to cut up your knights because they're a high armor unit, well, those 2 or maybe even 3 stands, depending on where you placed your Mounted Noble Lord, if you charged, just lose that total Cleave, and now they're just sitting there, knocking on your knight's armor, not doing as much damage as they thought, and your knights are probably hitting back pretty hard. 40 points is pretty expensive for this, and you do lose the Lorien Lance, but I think it could be a really interesting play of charging into something that normally is really good at killing knights with that high Cleave, and just telling your opponent, nope, those 3 stands are touching my Mounted Noble Lord, they don't get Cleave, and now we can just sit here and fight and see who wins with no Cleave, and maybe my Mounted Noble Lord has Arms Master, so I do get Cleave for those attacks. The last 2 options here in the Indomitable Plate and the Mask of, I'm not even going to try to say this dude's name, they are 2 I would take if you take the upgrade that lets you take 2 Heirlooms. I probably wouldn't take these by themselves, because I would take the Armor of Domination or the Lorien Lances if I'm only taking 1. But the Indomitable Plate just gives you for 15 points, +1 wound, +1 defense. So I just look at this as for 30 points, because I have to spend the 15 to get the second Heirloom anyway. I'm getting +1 wound, +1 defense, making the Mounted Noble Lord a 5 wound character, and defense 4, 5 with the shield. So it makes him really, really tough, which I think is pretty good. I'll probably give that a try. And then the Mask just lets you reroll defense rolls of 6. So for 20 points, you're rerolling defense rolls of 6, which again is just a little added defense. Maybe, I haven't done the math on how statistically helpful it is, but maybe it pushes him to live through a duel when really he wouldn't, especially if you bought the Disorientating Strikes to make him -1 clash when your opponent's fighting you in the duels. That covers everything for the Mounted Noble Lord. I think he's great. I've used him as my Warlord in most of my games, and he definitely hasn't disappointed. Some games he doesn't make a charge when he's supposed to and gets murdered, unfortunately, but maybe that's the time I should be taking the Disorientating Strikes or giving him a second Heirloom to maybe reroll those 6s and give him a +1 wound, +1 defense. So hopefully let me know if you have any other builds that you 100 Kingdom players out there use for your Mounted Noble Lord. And I'd definitely be interested to see some of them in the comments. And again, thanks for listening, everybody. And probably this weekend, I'm going to cover the Spires half of the 2-player starter set like I did with the 100 Kingdoms. So hopefully you all will look out for that. And thanks for listening.